Okay, well, thanks, Chris. You've already been introduced to Chris Lott, and he'll be moderating. I've worked with Chris for 7 years. It's been a great pleasure. I've found his foibles, and I've found that he's not at all opposed to interrupting and making himself known.
Foibles?
That's the next session, is Chris Lott's foibles. So really, this is supposed to be a conversation, and we want to be able to elucidate some ideas about what we need to have for a value statement in order to really get all the stakeholders that we need in an institution to be involved. In the years when I was working at the Center for Distance Education, it was about implementing things. It was about getting people to come into the e-learning environment and to start creating materials and exploring new kinds of learning and learning technology. Since I've moved over to School of Management, where it is really about working with the institution. And this is the crux of a time that I think is really important for us to consider, that a university as an institution is really something that is both a politically contested place, a culturally contested place, a place of theater, and a place where we can do learning. And if we only concentrate on that aspect of doing learning, we know that there are many places that are going to be more efficient and better at doing it, and you hear all the doomsday stories about the end of universities, which most of us will applaud. However, at the current time, we do have universities, they do have funding, and they are in the midst of the political sphere. So it's good if we can understand what their agendas are. And in this, this presentation, the idea here is that so there was together. Except for find them on the street and say, hey, you did a great job. You really nailed it. Desire to have student exchanges. So I asked the people that are running international programs in Alaska, do you need to track any of this stuff? Do you have to have any way of knowing what's going on? No, we've got it all. We have our files. We know where our students are going. We have so little activity that we don't need to worry about that. However, the provost from University of Cincinnati had just put this software together. They built that pulls that data from a lot of different sources at the University of Cincinnati. And I'm going to show you a few screenshots of what kind of data that is. And while I'm watching this, I'm thinking, this is the customer relation management. And it's expensive. And boy, I didn't break the habit, but man, I haven't got $150,000 to invest. So I asked him, don't people ask you, is there any way to get this? And he said, oh yeah, they ask us all the time. They want to buy it, but we won't sell it to them. Well, you won't sell it to him, how come? He comes from a software background. So, well, we want to give it to him. I said, really? We want to give it to him. Why is that? So then he ran through the list of reasons why they didn't want to sell it, those responsibilities, but they wanted to give it away, and then create a user community in order to share improvements and things like that. Oh, you know, that sounds an awful lot like the open software movement. He says, yeah, well, like that. And now I have to try to sell that to my president, but I have to sell it to him in a way that's going to make money for the university. He says, okay, good luck. You know, see what you can do. If I can convince the University of Alaska to take this, it's going to wind up costing us probably $3,000. And software is worth several hundred thousand. So, and if enough other people do it, so in case you go back to your university and think about it, you know, it's going to make it possible. China, they listed this number of institutional agreements and where people are located and what they're doing. You drill down and you can see where the faculty members are. All this information spread across the University of Cincinnati. It is not available for people to see. I mean, it's not secret, but it's just not available. And then where the graduate students are coming from, what programs they're in, where they got their degrees, their corporate partnerships that they may have with different places in China. And once you get all this together, as a user, you can see a pattern. And if then you're going to China, you're going to one of these places, oh, I got graduate students from here, with, so-and-so got their degree from here, with someone in music, someone in astronomy, and put it together in some kind of new and novel way. And that's what transparency is. So I'm going to have to get that. Now, when we look at those things, there's this is from the Edges University paper, that some places will feel like building a reputation is okay if you happen to already have a big reputation. And so those places that want to give things out, like MIT or Oxford, great, they can do that and improve their reputation. But it's not really a value to an institution that doesn't have that. The institution that doesn't have an already established reputation, it's really about offering better quality service to students. And so now we know that's a value for the institution. You just have to repeat that to the people who are funding the open education resources. It's not about just being PR for already an organization that's not. Time to degree. There are people that will say that we have don't have enough students graduating in 4 years or 3 years. That it's taken 6 years or longer for people to get BA degrees. That's not good. And they're doing that, especially in the public institutions, on taxpayer dollars. And so we're now seeing movements in a number of states where they're actually penalizing students if they take too many courses because they have excess credits over what they need for the BA. You're supposed to have 120 credits. If you get up to 135 or 150, oh, they're going to double the cost of those credits. Now, as an educator, you go, well, take more classes, explore more, do more stuff. We want people to take classes. But there are a lot of legislators who are saying, no, can't do that. So how do you give students education, broaden them out, let them select and try out different majors and things like that without using taxpayer money to enroll in classes and get credits? Simple, how we are. So improve the time to degree by letting people explore without having to enroll in credits. And for Florida House of Representatives, they just got this bill, it's just passed. They're saying that all these extra credits that students are taking cost the state $62 million. Because they're not being efficient. They're spending more than 120 credits to get their education. That's terrible. Well, and on the other hand, we're saying you should be a student your whole life. So we have to put aside our idea that the university is about education and think about the value people have of creating an additional taxpayer in the state. There's one of the things people are using to show this is look at the number of days it takes to get a bachelor's degree. This is so you get apples to apples comparison amongst universities. And to blow it up a little bit, about 1,000 days is a 4-year degree, and the long tail keeps going far beyond. I think a real good argument for people would be to say, look, if we can have open education resources for students to look at, they're going to be on the left side of that 1,000 days, because they're going to be able to focus themselves a lot better. Higher retention rates. Now, one thing you can ask people in your outreach office is what's it takes to recruit a student. And say, they probably can give you a number that costs $2,000 for a student, or we send people out, and we have so many people in our office working and that kind of thing. But if you ask them, what do you save if you retain a student, then it gets a little bit foggier, but there is a lot of pressure on administrators to find ways to retain students. And so when we look at the dropout rates, freshman dropout rates, sophomore dropout rates, the argument usually is not about the cost of the education, it's about the relevance of the education. It's about the kind of security that students have getting into working at the university in the first place. And one of the studies was showed that if you had good preparation in math, you're much more likely to be retained as a student than if you didn't have good preparation in math. Well, why not just have a remedial math open education resource for people to go through as many times as they want? Why not have a couple of courses people go through without any threats to their social identity that they can explore in?
What would motivate them to do that? Why would say a high school graduate, see, I'm thinking that you're right, lack of preparation in math is surely an indicator, because people who do really well in math for years and years and years, but then there are other factors all around that. It's just that math seems to be where it's most obvious. But I think a big part of dropouts early on is just due to a lack of the understanding of the culture and orientation to it, because of course children of college graduates do much better in college than first generation. Why would a student in the 11th or 12th or whatever grade take the remedial courses? Would they say, golly, if I do well in math, I'm more likely to stay in college if I can get in? Would they sit down and start doing it and self-assessing to see how well they're doing and what they need to get better? I mean, how do you picture that?
Yeah, why would a student even be doing it? And if a student is already suffering in high school, they're less likely to want to be involved in these kinds of things. However, there is a kind of a culture amongst the people who are doing well in high school who think then they're going to do very well in college, and in fact they flunk out.
Right.
In Alaska, we have valedictorians out of all of our high schools. Actually, some of the high schools only have 10 students. So it's, there are something like 75% of valedictorians coming out of Alaska high school go immediately into remedial courses in college. And so those people that already think that they are a good student ought to have an opportunity to be exposed to what a university level course is before they have to risk their own identity. And so without having to register, without having to pay anything, but an ability just to test themselves against it. And I think that it's very possible to inspire people to take that opportunity to just get a feel for orienting themselves.
So you're picturing sort of like a high school counselor or teacher would say, those of you who are college bound, here's this opportunity for you to kind of self-assess your readiness. And so that's how you picture that resource being used?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it would be, the marketing of it probably, yet to be done, but it seems entirely possible.
Yeah. It's just so much of not knowing what they don't know. I mean, having been there, I know. I'm still there, but that's what I was wondering. Just the operationalization of inspiring use of that resource in these students.
Well, there's a shock of the realization that you're really not as prepared as you thought you were.
Yeah,
that hurts a lot of people. Okay, moving right along. How are we doing on time, please?
Yeah, about 20 minutes.
I'm partway through.
You're about 1:40.
Yeah. Chris and I made presentations before at conferences, and usually, as a senior person, I got to say, well, I'll talk for just a minute, and then you can take over because you've got all the content. And he'd say, okay, that's a Curt minute. So I'm going to give you 30 minutes.
Like when Microsoft says you have 1 minute left on something, it takes 30 minutes. That's a lot like the Curt.
Yeah. So anyway, break in anytime. Then this is probably a little bit of additional stretch for the build on the last value. That if you can increase the depth of learning, hardly anyone is going to argue against that. But one of the ways that you can do it is to simply give people some preview and give them a chance to review what they've already gone through, without making them pay for it again, without making them be identified to their instructors, to anyone that they're doing it. Simply make that opportunity of real materials that are in the real program. So this is about making OERs for the student body, which is in the university. It's great. Then the last one, I got this from John C. Brown. Well, you know what? Faculty members are really difficult to control. And for any of you that are faculty members, you know how difficult you are. And for those people who are administrators, you know, this goes without saying. You can set up a sequence, math 101, 102, 103, and it's perfectly logical and it's in place, and you take it through the faculty senate, curriculum review, and everything's beautiful. By 1 year later, it's starting to go like this. And for the person who's teaching 102 to wonder what's in 101, you know, that means faculty members talk about what they're actually doing with each other. Maybe. That means going and sitting in their class and seeing what they're doing, looking at their reading material, seeing what their final exams are. Never going to happen. So if you simply take the entire sequence and you put it all as open education resource and you keep it more or less aligned to what's going on in the classroom, you don't have to do anything about badgering faculty members. They'll automatically align. They automatically want to have it easier to teach the course they're teaching by building on what people have already had. So that's just another advantage. Reputation builder. Now, George Siemens is a well-known name. And I think part of it has to be from teaching 2,000 students out of the University of Manitoba in the free course. You know, that's a nice thing. Faculty members like to be to publish their things. They like to be knowing what they're doing. They like to engage the public. So, what a great reason to go ahead and make your course in open education.
How many graduates
How many graduates?
out of that free course?
Oh, what, 3, 4, I don't know.
I can answer that one.
Yeah, that's
There was 20 registered students, and I think they all passed the course. And then the 2,000 plus were just part of the course, but weren't doing the assignments anymore.
I think when we talk about that long tail, you know, most of those 2,000 people probably sat in a little bit here.
Yeah, they probably did, but they got exposed to it. And so from reputation building point of view for instructors, okay, so let's go on to another institution. If you're importing courses, what are you going to do? What's going to make you want to use it? And the learning object repositories that have so many things put in with very few things taken out, unless there's some kind of draw for other places using open education resources, it's hard to make it penalizes the argument of putting them together in your own institution, even though you have a lot of intra-institutional needs for them. One of the things you want to do is say that these are also going to be used by other institutions. And so, just 3 points here. You want to make the importing organization will want to make sure that they can localize what that open education resource is. And so, as an importing organization, just look through it. If you can localize it, great. If not, just don't use it. Then when you do actually use it, it's great if you can let the people know that created it that you're using it, because that's going to cue them in about how popular it is. A tool that I'd really like to see built would be if you could take all of the Chemistry 101 courses, or Introduction to Western Civilization, or Middle Middle Ages English literature or something like that. You take all of those and aggregate the reading list and pick out somehow what is common and what is unusual. And so as an importing organization, you'd say, well, you know, I'm not going to use any of these open education resources, but I'm going to look through and see what everyone seems to be quoting. What is everyone using as a resource? What's everyone putting on the reading list? And then build my own on that. In other words, aggregate all of the efforts that are being done without using any particular one. And then if there can be a link between the design of the course and the outcomes from the course. WCET has now launched a new website that they're asking people to share their student success data around different courses and have those directly linked to the design principles. So I'm afraid to click that link right there, but if you'd like to see it, that is the WCET set of design principles. And that would be a really nice resource for an importing organization. So the last institutional group that I want to talk about is the researchers. And we do a lot of National Science Foundation research in Alaska, about $400 million a year worth. And they had the board of National Science Foundation came and had their meeting. Their meetings every month, but one meeting was outside Washington, D.C. each year. And last year, they had that meeting in Fairbanks. And so I went to talk to the board. And I had a chance to get with the Inspector General out in the hallway. A really nice lady. And I said, well, so would it be possible if a person got a National Science Foundation grant and they have a requirement to do a final report? I said, oh, final report, so yeah, it'd be good if they turned in their final report. I said, well, would it be possible to make that final report rather than a glossy thing that goes on the shelf, but a structured approach to the knowledge domain of the document? In other words, you've got your findings. Well, what is the context those findings are in? What are the assumptions that you use in order to begin your research? What is the sort of school of thought that this research has occurred in, which normally doesn't make it into a final report. But if you take your researcher and you put him with an instruction designer, and the instruction designer does a lot of writing up that report, and the researcher puts in their content and the findings, what do you think? Would that be okay? And she said, wow, that would be great. We love it. Do you know that we get less than 50% of the projects we fund that even turn in a final report? And I went, how many billions of dollars do we give to National Science Foundation? How much money do they give to our university, which is not the biggest one? And they don't even turn in their final reports? Because, yeah, you know, researchers, they got their money, they do their thing, they do their experiment, you know, they write their peer-reviewed paper, they're off. They're on to their next thing. They're not interested in writing a final report. And there's always some reason, there's one more thing, we're gonna do it later, get an extension like that. 50% never turn in anything. You know, I was shocked. You know, I don't get millions of dollars for my research, I'd still write a final report. So why don't we just sort of put those two groups together? So I talked to the head of the Arctic Research Consortium and the Geophysical Society there at University of Alaska. What do you think? How about if I could find you a couple instructional designers and put with your researchers? Wouldn't you talk to them? And they'll write their final report for you. And I said, oh yeah, good. So that's a project. Chris is going to hear about that one.
Yeah, sure.
And then another advantage is that when you do that, you've made a structured approach to this knowledge domain in which a scientist who is in a somewhat splintered kind of approach to science now has an ability to share that with people who are in a different part of science. So you can get this cross-sharing because you have a particular kind of jargon that you use. If you're doing volcanology, you don't use if you're studying tsunamis. And so you need that kind of a contextual
arrangement with it, which is going to allow some more sharing across the institution. So for all those reasons, I say it's great. And I said, well, okay, so I still got to pay the instruction designers. And instructional designers in Alaska make really poor money. You should see, you know, they're usually like riding their bicycles to classes, to work and stuff, you know, walking, you know, they eat, old dried vegetables and stuff. So instructional designers have got a rotten life. They got to make their money, but they still need some money. So I looked up in the Polar Regions research, and there is something from National Science Foundation that will give you $75,000 to support doing an outreach, which according to Inspector General, an OER would be perfect. If you already have a National Science Foundation grant, you can get $75,000 extra to do this. And, you know, $75,000 would probably pay for doing a research. So, especially if you just give it all to the instructional designer and have them work with the researcher who is more than pleased to get out some of the work. So that money's available. And they also have to engage with K-12. This is shows the amount of applications National Science Foundation gets compared to the numbers they fund. Now, if you don't put in your final report and you don't outreach any place and you don't share with other places, what are the chances you're going to be in the blue one instead of the green one? I think it's pretty high. So again, this is a great way to bring in the researchers to help us out. Okay, those are the three institutional people I want to talk about. Now I'd like to talk about some things that don't work.
For 5 minutes.
Okay, 5 minutes will be plenty.
That will work.
That's including time for questions?
Okay, so
We started a few minutes late, so you'll have a few minutes for questions.
a franchise revenue stream, you know, I'm sorry, but the value of content is driving to zero. And so those places that want to hoard theirs so that they can sell it later, I don't think that's going to work. Let's see, well, I won't mention any names, but I know that there have been some universities who are hoping they're able to do that. I'd say give it up, and it can work. And then there's also, this is one college that had suggested that they would like to do open education resources because it really would be a good thing for the world. However, it costs them money to do it, so they cannot give things away freely without financial compensation. And I think that's just totally wrong thinking. So if you run into this, you know, it's I'd say go back to some of the other value statements because they're just not going to get any money for selling those materials. It's been tried in a variety of places, and it's never worked. So these guys really are just being instructionists. They're really not, it's not a valid argument. Then another argument that you hear is that there are parts of the world that are more developed than others. Those parts that are more developed and have got riches in their education system should be obligated to give some of that away to places that are not. And historically, that is noblesse oblige, and that's where if you have this stratified society, those people at the top of the society are morally required to give something away to sort of benefit the hoi polloi, you know. Well, I think that really is not a good idea. That is really will defeat things. And so I went to this wonderful tool called the Visual Thesaurus, where you just put in noblesse oblige, and you can find out that it's totally related to social control. And I'm like, wow, that's great. You know, that was the argument I was trying to make. But it was made for me straight out of this tool. So I got a little piece that I can read about that, and then I'm done. Okay. No doubt there's a range of motivations for creating and disseminating open education resources. Some of the motivations will appear quick-sighted and others will appear unsustainable. Still others will appear self-serving or unethical. We'll probably have to wait for history to sort out these categories and expose their ironies. When MIT announced that they're giving away their courseware in 2001, it was a radical idea. The disruptive influence of the web on the economics of higher education brought intense debate among established faculty and visionary educators. It also brought marketers, public relations, and development strategists. Clearly, courseware now operated on a new stage. People who saw education as a basic human right also saw open education resources as noblesse oblige to university gatekeepers. Those who had educational resources should provide access to locations that did not have it. The goal should be to create more and more open courses as a moral imperative. However, noblesse oblige covers a more sinister goal of status quo maintenance. The powerful and wealthy exist in a linked system to those without power. As goods move from the wealthy to the poor, those links get reinforced. If the nobility fills social needs on their own terms, then status quo is maintained. The education revolutionaries who advocate for the mere quantity of open education resources provided from Western universities and emerging institutions mask the dependency that flow creates. And I think that we have to be very aware of that when, this morning, like Catherine said, that it's a matter of making sure that what you're sharing is truly a collaboration and sharing, and is sharing process rather than the content which carries within it all of these linkages that promote the status quo maintenance. So
That's assuming you don't want the status quo to
Well,
colonize, but
yeah.
that was actually perfect. It ticked over to 11, so now it's question time.
Where does perfectly well fit in all this into your thinking, like
Microsoft, well, it's a wonderful organization. I think that if we go back to those values that really will resonate within any kind of an organization, a corporation needs to have goodwill in their PR and things like that. We have oil companies in Alaska that are very adept at that. And they give much money to the university, and they do some good social things. We want to let them keep doing it. But you have to realize they're doing it because of some internal values. And so if we suggest that the internal value is one of pure philanthropy, then it should follow those needs of the receiving institutions and not the needs of the giving institutions. So anyway, I just don't trust if someone says that they have a moral obligation. I'm too business-minded to think that moral obligations will be sustainable. Questions?
I had a quick one. I think what we've talked about so far are very three traditional sort of institutional organizations, that of creating, consuming, and researching. Do you see these leading to perhaps a fourth category of collaboration? Or do you consider collaboration in and of itself an institutional category? Because these are three things that perhaps institutions have already done, but have found that they haven't necessarily worked as well as this third or this fourth category of beginning from the outset a real collaborative process with institutions to begin creating and advertising that relationship as something that actually drives that selling point for the institution.
When people look at universities as doomed institutions, usually they'll then again build something which is better than the university. And I think what you're talking about is something that's better. Once you open the doors and you say that we're not going to be trying to maximize our own particular institution, or we're going to maximize some greater good that comes from a collaboration with institutions, then it won't be just universities. Pretty soon it's going to be this sort of amorphous boundary, and you get to edgeless university. So that there's community practice, and there are corporate business interests, there are a wide range of things. That is probably the future of what learning is going to be. And that's great. But for those places that aren't there yet, I'm saying you're trying to convince these administrators that are holding the politics and the money and the theater that our universities currently are. And might as well convince them with sustaining values that they understand.
And maybe to connect to that a little bit, I think another vector on this would be the question of the student stakeholders and the participatory culture and the role that collaboration and peer-to-peer work among students plays in the creation of open educational resources. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that in relation to maybe outreach, service learning, or just the way in which students are present in the curricular or the experience or processes of learning in the institution.
Clearly, if people are active, they're going to be learning more. So it's, I agree that that is an excellent thing to encourage. We did have a project in Alaska, which you'll see how it's going to really play out. But there is a relation between Alaska and Mongolia. It's maybe not completely obvious, but they're both sort of peripheral countries. And there was an ambassador to Mongolia who was an ex-classmate of mine, and we got together and said, well, what can we do about putting these places together? The National Guard trains in Mongolia from Alaska, and there are some mining interests that are similar, but it's very, very low amount of obvious similarities. And so well, we've got a lot of languages that are not spoken very much. And so less commonly taught languages got no support from publishers. They got no support from really the scholarly community. A lot of things are out there. So why not use the students that are going through learning, create the materials themselves? And so that was, we decided we could host it in Alaska. We had no Mongolians, and we had no Mongolian teachers. But we could host this course. Their Mongolian students were spread across North America. There's about a dozen of them. And there are Mongolian teachers who happen to be in Ulaanbaatar. So putting those together, all the materials being created by the students are going to